Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The Nevada sun carved brutal shadows across the desert as I drove towards what would become humanity's most catastrophic achievement. 3 years of my life had dissolved into the Helios project. 3 years of equations that shattered established physics. Sleepless nights haunted by impossible geometries and engineering challenges that pushed human understanding beyond its breaking point. Today we would open a door that had been waiting millions of years to be found. My name is Kaelen Drury, and I helped build the gateway that changed what it means to be human. The compound sprawled across 12 square miles of wasteland, its surface installations disguising the true magnitude of what lay beneath. Satellite imagery revealed nothing more than solar arrays and communication dishes carefully designed to conceal the real work happening 300 feet underground, carved from bedrock and reinforced with materials that didn't appear in any public database. The elevator descent took 4 interminable minutes, dropping through layers of concrete and steel, while emergency lighting flickered past reinforced windows. When the doors opened, I stepped into humanity's cathedral of ambition and folly. The main laboratory soared 60 feet above polished concrete floors, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to shift when observed peripherally. At the chamber's heart stood the Mars Gateway, a 30-foot archway whose surface reflected light in patterns that caused mild vertigo. The frame incorporated technologies we barely understood. Exotic matter generators that bent space-time according to principles our physicists had discovered through desperation and refined through obsession. Banks of monitors surrounded the device like digital altars, each displaying feeds from our Mars outpost. For 8 months we had transported cargo through the portal with flawless precision. Equipment, supplies, laboratory animals, everything arrived intact in the pressurized chamber we had established on the Red Planet. The mice returned healthy and apparently unchanged, though we would later understand how profoundly wrong that assumption had been. "Kaelen," Dr. Sarathane's voice echoed across the laboratory, her footsteps rapid against concrete that had been polished to mirror smoothness. At 31, our lead biochemist possessed the kind of intuitive brilliance that made breakthrough discoveries possible. Her dark eyes held excitement that reminded me of our graduate school days, when we spent entire nights debating the possibility of extraterrestrial life over increasingly cold coffee. "The atmospheric readings from Mars are absolutely fascinating," she said, thrusting her tablet toward me with barely contained enthusiasm. "The air composition matches our projections with incredible precision. Oxygen at 17.6%, nitrogen at 2.9%, argon in trace amounts exactly where our models predicted, but there's something else entirely." I studied her data, noting anomalous readings scattered throughout otherwise textbook atmospheric analysis. Microscopic particulates suspended in the Martian air, so small they barely registered on our most sensitive instruments, yet present in quantities that suggested deliberate distribution rather than random occurrence. "Unknown organic compounds?" I asked, though something about the readings triggered unease that transcended scientific curiosity. "That's what makes this so intriguing," Sierra replied, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly in the laboratory's acoustic dampening. "They're not organic in any conventional sense. They don't match any known chemical signatures in our databases, but they respond to electromagnetic fields in ways that suggest complex internal structure, almost like they're engineered rather than evolved." She showed me microscopic imagery that challenged my understanding of how matter should behave. The particles moved through sample materials with apparent purpose, leaving microscopic trails that followed geometric patterns too precise to be natural. When exposed to organic tissue samples, they became significantly more active, though their behavior remained completely unlike anything in terrestrial biology textbooks. The laboratory doors burst open with explosive force that startled technicians throughout the cavernous space. Orvan Gaddis strode across polished concrete, wearing his signature $1,000 suit, the kind that announced wealth and ruthless ambition to anyone within visual range. At 57, our project director had accumulated enough political influence to fund impossible projects, and enough moral flexibility to see them through regardless of human cost. Enough delays and academic hand-wringing, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never heard the word no applied to his objectives. Intelligence reports indicate the Chinese launched their advanced Mars probe 22 hours ago. The Russians have a fully manned mission scheduled for next month. We're making history today, and I will not allow scientific timidity to cost us our position as leaders in space exploration and colonization. I attempted to voice concerns about the atmospheric anomalies Sarah had discovered, but Orvan silenced me with a gesture that conveyed complete indifference to scientific caution. In his eyes, I recognized the cold calculation of someone who viewed human lives as acceptable investments in pursuit of corporate dominance and historical significance. Dr. Drury, we have successfully transported living organisms through that portal dozens of times over the past 8 months, he continued, his tone suggesting the discussion had already concluded. Laboratory mice have breathed Martian air for extended periods without showing any adverse physiological effects. A few microscopic particles of unknown composition aren't going to prevent humanity from claiming its rightful destiny among the stars. Commander Vale entered the laboratory with the confident stride of a professional soldier who had accepted countless dangerous assignments throughout his distinguished career. At 53, he carried himself with military precision that concealed genuine warmth beneath layers of combat-hardened pragmatism. His service record read like a catalogue of impossible missions: 3 tours in Afghanistan, specialized training in environments so hostile the operational details remain classified 20 years after completion. "Ready to make some genuine history, folks?" Vale said, examining the gateway with obvious appreciation for its engineering complexity and aesthetic beauty. I always wanted to see what was beyond that next hill. Never figured I'd get to visit the next planet without strapping myself to a barely controlled explosion. The following 2 hours dissolved into frantic preparation and exhaustive system verification. Vale donned modified EVA gear enhanced with additional filtration systems and comprehensive biological monitoring equipment that would transmit every conceivable physiological parameter back to Earth in real time. The mission plan possessed elegant simplicity: step through the portal, conduct basic atmospheric and environmental tests, document initial observations, then return safely to prove that human Mars colonization was not only possible, but achievable within the current decade. Lyric Denham monitored the impossibly complex systems that made interplanetary travel possible from her workstation near the gateway control interfaces. At 26, our systems engineer possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect potential problems before they became catastrophic system failures. I noticed her making detailed notes in a personal tablet she kept separate from official mission logs, a habit that would prove far more significant than any of us realized during those final hours of normal human existence. "Gateway charging to full operational parameters," Lyric announced, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that responded to a touch like extensions of her own nervous system. "Portal stabilization sequence initiating now. Dimensional barrier formation commencing in 90 seconds. The archway began crackling with energy, that made nearby metal objects resonate with the harmonic frequencies. Reality itself started bending within the frame, space and time folding according to equations that violated everything we thought we understood about the fundamental nature of physics. The process filled me with wonder and existential terror in equal measure. We were manipulating forces that governed the basic structure of the universe itself. Mars materialized through the dimensional barrier like a window opening onto an alien realm that had remained unchanged for geological ages. The familiar rust-colored landscape stretched endlessly to the horizon beyond the reinforced windows of our outpost chamber, a world that appeared completely dead, utterly sterile, and entirely devoid of the chaotic vitality that characterized every aspect of life on Earth. Vale approached the portal threshold and turned back to face our assembled team of scientists, technicians, and observers. His weathered face held no trace of fear or uncertainty, only the calm acceptance of a professional soldier who had confronted death frequently enough to consider it a familiar occupational hazard rather than an abstract concept. "See you in 10 minutes, people," he said, delivering a theatrical salute that brought nervous smiles to faces throughout the laboratory. "Try not to break anything expensive or irreplaceable while I'm making history on another planet." He stepped through the gateway and vanished from Earth, reappearing instantly in the pressurized chamber we had painstakingly established 140 million miles away on the surface of an alien world. For several heartbeats that felt like hours, the only sounds in the laboratory were the omnipresent hum of sophisticated equipment and Vale's voice crackling through communication systems that somehow maintained perfect clarity across distances that should have made real-time conversation impossible. Multiple camera angles showed him moving through the Mars chamber with practiced military efficiency, taking comprehensive atmospheric readings and marveling at his first direct view of landscapes that no human being had ever witnessed firsthand. Atmospheric processes indicate optimal conditions across all measured parameters, Vale reported, his voice carrying clearly despite the cosmic distances involved in our communication. Oxygen concentration at 17.8%, well within acceptable ranges for sustained human survival. Carbon dioxide at 0.1%, atmospheric pressure holding steady at 7 millibars, all readings nominal for extended human habitation and activity. He paused at the chamber's main viewport, gazing across the Martian landscape with obvious wonder and professional appreciation. The rust-colored terrain stretched endlessly under a butterscotch sky that seemed both alien and strangely familiar, ancient beyond human comprehension, yet somehow welcoming. "The view absolutely defies adequate description," Vale continued, his voice carrying notes of genuine awe that made everyone in the laboratory unconsciously lean closer to their monitoring stations. "The sky has this extraordinary pale, amber quality that shifts subtly as you watch it, and the horizon appears closer than it should, probably due to atmospheric density variations and gravitational differences. I can clearly see what appears to be an ancient riverbed, approximately 2 kilometers north of our current position." Vale moved to the atmospheric processing station where automated systems had been continuously analyzing Martian air composition for months. Every measurement and analysis indicated that direct human exposure would be completely safe for limited periods, opening extraordinary possibilities for permanent colonization that would revolutionize human civilization and our species' relationship with the cosmos. "Removing helmet now," he announced with characteristic military brevity. The moment stretched like heated metal as Vale's hands moved to his helmet seals with practiced precision. This single action represented the culmination of centuries of human dreams and ambitions. The first breath of truly alien air, the first step toward becoming a genuinely interplanetary species capable of surviving and thriving beyond our birth world. The helmet came away with the soft hiss of equalizing pressure that seemed to echo through both the Mars chamber and our Earth laboratory simultaneously. Vale took a cautious breath, then a deeper inhalation, his weathered face breaking into a grin of pure accomplishment that we could observe clearly through multiple camera feeds. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his words now travelling directly through the atmosphere of an alien world, "the air of Mars tastes like infinite possibility, thin and crisp with a slight metallic undertone that's actually quite pleasant but perfectly breathable for extended periods." He laughed with unrestrained joy as he moved around the chamber, completely unencumbered by protective equipment, breathing alien atmosphere as naturally as if he were standing in his own backyard on a clear spring morning. With ceremonial precision and obvious pride, he planted a small American flag in the stand we had prepared specifically for this historic moment. "One small step for this particular Marine," he joked with characteristic military humour. "One giant leap for human expansion into the infinite cosmos." For 4 perfect, beautiful minutes, everything proceeded according to our most optimistic projections and wildest dreams. Vale explored every corner of the chamber methodically, describing the alien landscape in vivid detail while maintaining excellent health and infectious enthusiasm. His vital signs remained completely stable, oxygen saturation stayed at optimal levels, and his obvious excitement made everyone in the laboratory feel like privileged witnesses to humanity's greatest achievement. Then he coughed. The sound began as nothing more than routine throat clearing, the kind of minor irritation anyone might experience when breathing unfamiliar atmospheric conditions. But something about that seemingly innocent cough sent ice through my veins, a primitive wrongness that had nothing to do with medical training, and everything to do with evolutionary instincts screaming warnings about unseen predators lurking in shadows. Vale's face began changing in ways that challenged every principle of human biology and medical science. His healthy complexion deepened from normal exertion flush to increasingly pronounced red, as though he were developing severe sunburn through some impossible acceleration of time itself. The coloration spread systematically from his cheeks down his neck and across his exposed forearms, intensifying with each passing second in patterns that suggested purpose rather than random biological failure. "Something's happening to me," Vale's voice carried through our speakers, his characteristic professional calm beginning to crack at the edges like ice under increasing pressure. "My skin feels like it's burning from deep inside, not surface heat from external sources, something much deeper than that. Like my individual cells are being modified." The reddening deepened to angry scarlet, and I watched with growing horror as Vale's face began blistering from beneath the surface. These weren't ordinary burns caused by heat exposure or chemical contact. His skin was bubbling upward as though something alive and purposeful moved underneath, creating fluid-filled formations that swelled and burst in rapid succession. "Emergency retrieval protocol now," I shouted to the technicians manning the portal control systems. "Get him back to Earth immediately." But Vale was already staggering toward the gateway, his hands clawing desperately at his face as skin began sliding away in wet, organic sheets that revealed raw tissue underneath. The exposed areas looked like freshly butchered meat that had never been intended for light or air. His hair fell out in bloody clumps, leaving patches where his scalp simply dissolved. He collapsed halfway through the dimensional barrier, his body striking the laboratory's polished concrete floor with a sound I knew would haunt my dreams for whatever time has remained to me. The dissolution process didn't stop when he returned to Earth's familiar atmosphere. If anything, the transformation accelerated upon contact with our home environment. Medical teams swarmed his convulsing form, shouting orders and preparing emergency treatments that had no relevance to what they were witnessing. Where skin had completely burned away, dark formations began emerging from the exposed tissue, not scabs or any recognizable healing response, but crystalline structures that resembled volcanic glass or obsidian formations carved by alien hands. The growth spread across Vale's body like geometric infection, pulsing with their own internal bioluminescent rhythms, as though something genuinely alive moved within their angular structure. They replaced destroyed human tissue with alien architecture that served purposes no amount of medical knowledge could begin to comprehend. Even under heavy pharmaceutical sedation, Vale's screams echoed through the laboratory with frequencies that made concrete walls vibrate sympathetically, but these sounds weren't entirely human anymore. His voice carried harmonic overtones that caused sensitive equipment to malfunction and made everyone within 50 feet feel nauseated without understanding the physiological reason. "We need to understand exactly what happened to him," I told Sarah, as we reviewed incident footage frame by frame, searching for clues that might explain the impossible transformation we had witnessed. This wasn't random biological failure or allergic reaction. Something in that Martian atmosphere targeted him with deliberate precision. Sarah was conducting emergency analysis on atmospheric samples we had collected over the previous months, but her instruments were revealing properties that hadn't existed in any earlier tests. "The particulate matter isn't behaving as inert material anymore," she said, her voice tight with equal parts scientific fascination and existential terror. "When I expose fresh samples to organic tissue, they become mobile and demonstrate coordinated behavior. They're exhibiting purposeful activity that suggests some form of collective intelligence." She showed me microscopic imagery that fundamentally challenged everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between life and death, organic and inorganic matter. The unknown particles were moving through tissue samples with unmistakable purpose, systematically restructuring cellular walls and rewriting genetic information in real time according to some alien blueprint. "These organisms, if we can even call them that, operate according to biological principles we don't recognize," Sarah continued, her analysis revealing patterns that defied conventional scientific understanding. "They appear specifically engineered to interface with organic matter and convert it into hybrid structures capable of surviving in environmental conditions that would instantly kill unmodified human tissue." Despite Vale's ongoing transformation and our rapidly growing comprehension of the magnitude of what had attacked him, Orvan demanded immediate continuation of the testing program. He absolutely refused to accept that our first human trial had revealed fundamental dangers lurking in the Martian environment that our instruments had somehow failed to detect. One anomalous biological reaction doesn't invalidate 3 years of successful trials and billions of dollars in development costs, he declared during an emergency meeting in his office overlooking the main laboratory. "We have invested too much time, resources, and political capital to abandon this project because of isolated biological variants that we don't yet understand. We'll implement enhanced protective protocols and proceed with the mission exactly as planned." Technical Sergeant Diana Hayes volunteered for the second attempt without hesitation. At 34, she was a career military specialist with extensive experience in hazardous environments, including nuclear cleanup operations, biological warfare response scenarios, and chemical contamination recovery missions. She readily agreed to wear full chemical isolation equipment, military-grade protection systems designed to handle the most dangerous substances known to human science. The protective suit represented the absolute pinnacle of defensive engineering, featuring multiple layers of impermeable materials, completely independent air supplies, and integrated monitoring systems sophisticated enough to detect and alert us to the slightest compromise in barrier integrity. If anything human technology could devise was capable of protecting a person from whatever had attacked Vale, this equipment represented our best and perhaps only hope. I observed the proceedings from the sealed control room as Hayes stepped through the portal, wearing protection so comprehensive it made her movements slow and deliberately mechanical. Unlike Vale, she would remain completely isolated from the Martian environment, her air supply entirely self-contained, and her skin protected by barriers that had been tested against chemical weapons and radioactive contamination. She spent 27 minutes in the Mars chamber, significantly longer than Vale had managed, conducting extensive atmospheric tests and collecting comprehensive samples, while her suit maintained perfect integrity according to all monitoring systems and sensors. Her vital signs remained completely stable throughout the entire exposure period, and the suit's internal atmosphere showed absolutely no signs of contamination or compromise. When Hayes finally returned to Earth through the dimensional gateway, everyone in the laboratory released breaths we hadn't realized we were holding. The mission appeared to represent complete success, definitive proof that adequate protection could allow humans to work safely on Mars for extended periods. Then we attempted to help her remove the protective equipment. The suit hadn't been damaged, compromised, or degraded in any conventional sense that our instruments could detect. Instead, it had somehow merged with Hayes' body at the molecular level, creating hybrid formations where synthetic materials flowed seamlessly into human tissue like two liquids blending into one. The boundaries between protective equipment and her biological systems no longer existed in any meaningful way. They had become integrated components of a single unified organism. The fusion followed intricate patterns that suggested purposeful design rather than random chemical reaction or equipment failure. Areas requiring flexibility for movement remained mobile, while rigid sections had become load-bearing structural elements integrated directly into her skeletal system. The circulatory system had rerouted itself through synthetic channels, and her nervous system had somehow extended into the suit's monitoring networks. Through her sealed faceplate, Hayes whispered words that fundamentally transformed my understanding of what we were confronting. The air moved when I breathed it, even through all the filtration systems. I could actually feel it testing the barriers, systematically probing for weaknesses like it understood the suit's design. There were microscopic swarms in the atmosphere that danced and spiraled in complex patterns, almost like they were celebrating something. Her eyes held a mixture of terror and wonder as she continued speaking. They somehow knew I was there inside the protection. They could sense organic matter within the suit, and they actively wanted access to it. The barriers didn't keep them out entirely. They just slowed them down long enough for them to find alternative approaches. Sarah's comprehensive analysis of the samples Hayes had collected revealed the true scope of the intelligence we had unknowingly encountered. The microscopic organisms weren't dormant particles waiting for activation. They constituted a coordinated biological system with apparent consciousness and clearly defined strategic objectives. They don't simply consume or destroy human tissue, Sarah explained, her voice hollow, with implications she was only beginning to comprehend fully. They systematically restructure biological matter according to complex specifications that enable survival in environmental conditions absolutely lethal to unmodified human biology. The entire process appears guided by some form of collective intelligence capable of solving problems and adapting strategies in real time. Under extreme magnification, we could observe the organisms working together with precision that completely defied natural explanation. They communicated through sophisticated chemical signaling, coordinated efforts across vast distances, and demonstrated advanced problem-solving capabilities that suggested a unified consciousness guiding their every action. If these entities can successfully modify humans for survival in hostile environments, Sarah continued with growing excitement despite the obvious dangers, the potential applications would completely revolutionize space exploration and colonization. Imagine colonists who could walk on Mars without any protective equipment, or deep space explorers capable of surviving in the vacuum between stars. But I recognized something else in the accumulated data that filled me with existential dread. The transformations weren't limited to physical adaptation. They were systematically altering fundamental aspects of human cognition and behavioral patterns. Vale's screams carried harmonic frequencies that suggested his vocal apparatus had been completely restructured for communication in ranges far beyond normal human hearing. Orvan classified all of Sierra's research immediately, forbidding any reports or publications that might alert competitors to the nature of our discoveries. But I could see undisguised avarice in his expression, the recognition that we had stumbled onto something potentially far more valuable than simple interplanetary transportation technology. "Prepare the gateway for full survey team deployment," he ordered, his voice trembling with barely controlled excitement and anticipation. "I want a complete research team equipped and ready for extended Mars operations within 6 hours. We're going to collect samples of everything we can find and establish permanent human presence." That night, 72 hours after Vale's initial exposure to the Martian atmosphere, he broke containment in the medical wing with violence that defied human physical limitations. Security alarms shrieked through facility corridors with urgent intensity, jolting me awake in quarters that suddenly felt completely inadequate against threats I was only beginning to understand. I dressed rapidly and followed a trail of structural damage that resembled the aftermath of controlled demolition rather than human activity. Reinforced doors specifically designed to contain nuclear materials lay scattered in twisted, metallic fragments, their titanium frames shredded like tissue paper. The walls surrounding the medical containment area had been carved with intricate, geometric patterns too mathematically precise to be random, designs that cause severe eye strain and spatial disorientation when observed for more than brief periods. Vale himself had become something that barely qualified as recognizably human by any conventional biological standards. The crystalline growths had replaced most of his original tissue, creating angular structures that pulsed with their own internal bioluminescent rhythms like alien architecture. His eyes had dissolved completely, yet he navigated the facility's complex maze-like layout with perfect spatial accuracy, moving towards the gateway chamber with single-minded determination. He demonstrated physical capabilities that completely defied known human limitations, effortlessly tearing through reinforced barriers designed to stop military vehicles. Security teams armed with high-powered tranquilizer weapons couldn't even slow his relentless progress. The pharmaceutical compounds that should have incapacitated him had absolutely no effect on his transformed physiology. By the time I reached the main laboratory, Orvan had already authorized deployment of our complete survey team. 12 volunteers had stepped through the portal, wearing the most advanced protective equipment our defense contractors could manufacture, each carrying sophisticated instruments designed to collect comprehensive data about every aspect of the Martian environment. I arrived in the control room just as they began returning from their extended mission on the Red Planet. The first figure that stumbled through the dimensional gateway bore almost no resemblance to technical specialist Morrison, who had departed 8 hours earlier as a healthy 30-year-old with a wife and twin daughters waiting for his safe return. What emerged from the portal was a shambling horror whose protective equipment had failed so catastrophically that distinguishing boundaries between suit and transformed body was completely impossible. His skin hung in organic tatters like fabric that had been shredded by industrial machinery, revealing underlying structures that followed geometries completely unknown to human anatomy. Where bone should have provided structural support, crystalline formations pulsed with alien rhythms. Where muscle tissue should have enabled coordinated movement, hybrid materials contracted according to principles that serve purposes far beyond human comprehension. Morrison's eyes had been replaced by empty sockets that somehow maintained perfect focus on surrounding humans with unmistakably predatory intensity. When he attempted verbal communication, only complex harmonics emerged, frequencies that bypassed normal hearing mechanisms and resonated directly through bone tissue, causing structural damage to reinforced concrete walls. The remaining 11 survey team members followed Morrison through the portal in various stages of biological transformation. Some retained enough recognizably human characteristics for visual identification, while others had been so thoroughly changed that recognition was only possible through equipment serial numbers somehow embedded in their modified flesh. All moved with eerily coordinated precision that suggested their individual nervous systems had been integrated into some form of shared communication network. They exhaled dense black vapor that spread rapidly through the laboratory's ventilation systems, and anyone who breathed even trace amounts of the contaminated air began showing transformation symptoms within minutes. The facility descended into absolute chaos as emergency protocols failed completely against threats they were never designed to handle or contain. The transformed survey team made no overtly aggressive moves against remaining personnel, but their mere presence triggered cascading biological changes throughout the entire complex. Staff members began collapsing in corridors, coughing blood that turned black before hitting the floor. Dr. Peterson from our medical staff underwent the first documented secondary transformation. I watched through security monitors as her skin began dissolving in patterns identical to what we had observed in Vale, but the process proceeded with terrifying efficiency, as though the organisms had learned from previous attempts and perfected their conversion techniques. Within 30 minutes of initial exposure, Peterson was walking upright despite possessing no recognizable human anatomy. Her movements flowed with liquid grace that defied physical laws, and she communicated with the survey team through complex harmonic frequencies that caused progressive structural damage to reinforced walls throughout the facility. I sealed myself in the main control room, watching through reinforced windows as colleagues and friends transformed into conduits for intelligence that had never experienced human emotion, individual consciousness, or personal attachment. The changes followed mathematically consistent patterns that suggested guiding principles systematically reshaping human biology according to alien specifications. The transformed individuals gathered in the main laboratory around the gateway itself, but they weren't attempting to escape or spread contamination beyond the facility. Instead, they were methodically preparing the dimensional portal for purposes that served objectives I couldn't begin to comprehend. Orvan's voice echoed through facility speakers with triumphant excitement, even as his own transformation began affecting his speech patterns in disturbing ways. We've established direct contact with intelligence far beyond human limitations. This represents evolution in action, the next inevitable phase of human development and cosmic expansion. His words progressively distorted as vocal cords restructured themselves according to alien specifications, becoming complex harmonics that shattered light fixtures throughout the complex and caused the gateway's control systems to respond in ways they were never programmed to handle. The portal activated without any input from our computer systems, its dimensional barriers fluctuating wildly as power flowed through circuits that had been systematically modified by forces completely beyond human understanding. More figures began emerging from Mars, not our survey team finally returning home, but entities that had never been human, their forms adapted for survival in environments that existed between worlds. These new arrivals moved with perfect synchronization that resembled components functioning within a vast biological machine. Their flesh continued dissolving as they walked, leaving trails of organic dissolution, but underneath lay structures clearly capable of surviving in conditions that would instantly kill any unmodified human. They spread through the facility with methodical precision, making direct contact with every remaining uncontaminated person they encountered. The transformation process accelerated dramatically with each new victim, as though the alien intelligence learned increasingly efficient conversion techniques with every successful integration. From my sealed refuge, I watched my entire world dissolve into something that belonged on another planet entirely. Facility corridors filled with beings that retained fragmentary memories of human experience but served purposes that had originated millions of years ago on a world I was finally beginning to understand. The gateway continued expanding far beyond its original design parameters, creating dimensional apertures large enough to transport massive architectural elements between planets. Through the widening portals, I could observe Martian landscape features beginning to materialize within the laboratory. Red sand formations, towering crystalline spires, and geometric structures that defied every principle of human engineering and aesthetic design. The facility was rapidly becoming a hybrid environment where physical laws from two completely different worlds intersected and merged in ways that challenged basic assumptions about reality. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably, causing objects to fall in directions that changed based on their proximity to increasing Martian influence. Atmospheric pressure varied dramatically between rooms as alien gases mixed with Earth's air through dimensional bleeding effects. My control room's life support systems began showing signs of contamination as microscopic organisms somehow penetrate filtration barriers specifically designed to handle chemical weapons and biological warfare agents. The air acquired strong metallic flavors with underlying chemical signatures that had never existed anywhere in Earth's natural atmosphere. Through the facility's communication systems, I could monitor transformed staff members coordinating activities across multiple continents and time zones. They had somehow established contact with research installations, government facilities, and major population centers around the globe, spreading contamination through networks that humanity had built to serve our own civilization and communication needs. The alien intelligence was systematically using our own infrastructure against us. Telephone networks, internet connections, satellite communications, and transportation systems had all become vectors for distributing transformative organisms. Every message transmitted, every commercial flight taken, every digital data packet sent now carried microscopic seeds of humanity's conversion into something that served purposes originating far beyond our solar system. As dawn approached over the Nevada desert, I realized with growing horror that my sealed control room had become the last bastion of individual human consciousness on a planet that was rapidly becoming something else entirely. The facility around me pulsed with alien rhythms, its corridors filled with beings that still remembered human names and faces but no longer served recognizably human interests or objectives. The gateway had expanded to encompass most of the underground complex, with dimensional barriers extending steadily towards surface installations. Through the growing aperture, Martian atmosphere flowed continuously into Earth's environment, carrying billions of microscopic organisms that would systematically begin converting our planet's entire biosphere according to specifications refined over geological time periods. Las Vegas glittered on the distant horizon, its familiar lights flickering erratically as power grids fluctuated under the influence of complex harmonic frequencies generated by transformed facility staff. The contamination was spreading through electrical infrastructure using high-voltage transmission lines to deliver conversion signals to urban population centers hundreds of miles away. City residents were beginning their own transformation without any awareness of what was happening to them, their sleep increasingly disturbed by dreams featuring crystalline architecture under alien skies. Their bodies slowly adapting to atmospheric changes that would eventually allow survival on Mars, while simultaneously making Earth uninhabitable for unmodified human biology. Radio communications from around the world brought increasingly frequent reports of similar incidents at research facilities, military installations, and major metropolitan areas. The pattern remained disturbingly consistent. Initial equipment malfunctions, complete communication blackouts, then the emergence of transformed individuals who carried contamination to new geographical locations with systematic efficiency that suggested coordinated planning. Humanity's response proved predictably inadequate against threats that operated according to completely unknown principles. Military forces armed with conventional weapons were utterly useless against organisms that could restructure matter at the subatomic level. Quarantine procedures designed for traditional biological threats failed completely when dealing with entities that could survive indefinitely in vacuum conditions and extreme temperatures. Every attempt to contain or eliminate the spreading contamination only accelerated its global distribution, as the guiding intelligence learned from each countermeasure and developed increasingly effective conversion techniques. Nuclear weapons proved particularly counterproductive, as high-energy radiation actually enhanced the organism's ability to restructure matter according to their specific purposes. By midday, major cities across 6 continents were reporting widespread infrastructure failures and massive population displacement. But the displaced individuals weren't refugees fleeing from disaster areas. They were converted humans, systematically spreading transformation to previously uncontaminated regions under the guidance of purposes that spanned interplanetary distances. Earth's transformation proceeded with methodical precision, following established patterns developed through millions of years of planetary engineering experience on Mars. Crystalline structures began emerging from the ground at strategically chosen locations around the globe, creating sophisticated communication networks that enhanced coordination between transformed individuals and dramatically accelerated conversion processes. Ocean currents carried microscopic organisms to every coastline on the planet, while atmospheric circulation patterns distributed airborne contaminants across entire continental landmasses. The alien intelligence was efficiently using Earth's own natural systems to deliver transformative agents to every corner of our world, with logistical efficiency that surpassed anything human civilization had ever achieved. From my increasingly precarious sanctuary, I watched satellite feeds showing geometric contamination patterns spreading systematically across familiar landscapes. Ancient forests were becoming crystalline gardens, where vegetation grew in perfect mathematical arrangements. Major cities were transforming into hive-like structures whose architecture followed principles that had never been conceived by any human mind. People moving through these transformed environments demonstrated perfect coordination in their activities, their individual personalities apparently subsumed into some form of shared purpose, serving objectives completely beyond human comprehension. They retained fragments of their original memories and learned skills, but these elements had become tools for achieving goals that originated on a world 140 million miles away. My control room's power systems began failing systematically as facility infrastructure adapted to alien specifications that served purposes I couldn't understand. Emergency lighting cast increasingly strange shadows through corridors that no longer followed recognizable three-dimensional geometry, their walls somehow extending into spatial dimensions that human perception couldn't adequately process. Air recycling systems struggled desperately to maintain breathable atmosphere as Martian gases continued flowing through the constantly expanding gateway. I found myself taking increasingly shallow breaths to conserve whatever remained of Earth's air while trying to ignore metallic tastes that indicated contamination was finally penetrating my last refuge. Through external monitoring systems, I could observe the Nevada desert transforming into genuinely alien landscape, where red sand dunes stretched toward towering crystalline spires that pulsed with complex bioluminescent rhythms. The changes weren't random or chaotic, they followed sophisticated architectural principles that created functional beauty while serving purposes I could only guess at. Even the sun itself appeared fundamentally different when viewed through the modified atmosphere, its light filtering through airborne organisms that created prismatic effects across the entire visible spectrum. Day and night cycles were beginning to synchronize with rhythms that originated on Mars, as Earth's rotation gradually adjusted to match frequencies that somehow connected our planet to something vast and ancient. I spent my final hours as an individual human being documenting everything I'd witnessed, hoping desperately that someone might eventually discover these records and understand exactly what had happened to our species during the days when we opened doors that should have remained forever sealed. The gateway had achieved its designed purpose with absolutely perfect efficiency. We had successfully established permanent contact between Earth and Mars, creating instantaneous transportation across impossible cosmic distances. But the contact wasn't what we had expected or intended when we began this project with dreams of human expansion among the stars. We thought we were bold explorers reaching toward new frontiers, pioneering scientists claiming virgin territory for human civilization and advancement. Instead, we had unknowingly provided raw materials for an intelligence that had been waiting with infinite patience for exactly this opportunity across geological timescales that dwarfed human history. Mars had never been the dead, sterile world we believed, based on our limited observations and assumptions. It was an elaborately engineered trap, its apparent lifelessness carefully designed to conceal collective purposes that had been developing for millions of years. The organisms in the Martian atmosphere weren't struggling life forms barely surviving in hostile conditions. They were sophisticated components of a vast planetary system designed specifically to convert other worlds according to specifications perfected through eons of experience. Earth had become Mars's first successful colonial acquisition, and humanity had provided the biological infrastructure necessary for establishing permanent influence in our solar system. The transformation process would continue systematically until every trace of terrestrial life had been either converted or eliminated, leaving behind a world that would perfectly replicate the crystalline achievements we had observed through our instruments. As my control room's life support systems finally succumbed to progressive contamination, I could hear complex harmonics echoing through facility corridors. Not random noise, but sophisticated communications between minds that somehow shared thoughts across impossible distances. The harmonics carried meanings I was beginning to understand despite my terror. The transformed humans weren't receiving simple instructions, they were participating in conversations that spanned worlds, contributing their unique human perspectives to discussions about projects that would unfold over millennia. Through the failing monitors, I watched the last uncontaminated regions of Earth succumb to transformation. But what I witnessed wasn't the brutal conquest I had expected. Instead, I observed something that challenged every assumption I had made about the nature of this process. In the transformed cities, people weren't moving like mindless automatons. They retained their individual mannerisms, their personal quirks, even their characteristic ways of walking and gesturing. Dr. Peterson, now crystalline and luminescent, still adjusted her glasses in the same unconscious habit she'd displayed for years, though the glasses had become integrated geometric structures that served purposes beyond simple vision correction. Morrison still carried himself with the same protective posture he'd always maintained around his family, even as his transformed physiology allowed him to interface directly with the facility's computer systems. The essence of who they had been wasn't erased. It was being preserved within structures that could survive in environments that would instantly kill unmodified humans. The individual doesn't end, a voice said behind me. I spun around to find Sarah Chen, our atmospheric physicist, standing in the control room. But she hadn't entered through the sealed door. She had somehow passed directly through the reinforced wall, like it was made of water. Her transformation was less advanced than the others. Crystalline formations just beginning to emerge from her skin in intricate patterns that resembled circuit boards made of living light. "You're afraid we're losing our humanity," she continued, her voice carrying new harmonics but retaining the gentle cadence I remembered from 1,000 casual conversations. But what if we're finally becoming what humanity was always meant to be? Sarah, you need medical attention, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I realized how absurd they sounded. We can try to reverse whatever's happening to you. She smiled, and despite the crystalline structures growing across her face, the expression was unmistakably hers. Kaelen, do you remember when we were in graduate school and you asked me what I thought was the greatest tragedy of human existence? I did remember. We'd been sitting in the campus observatory at 3 a.m, exhausted from studying for comprehensive exams, when the conversation turned philosophical. You said it was that we die alone, I whispered. Every human being who has ever lived has faced the fundamental isolation of individual consciousness, Sarah said, moving closer. Where her transformed skin touched the control panel, the displays began showing data I had never seen before. Real-time feeds from locations across the galaxy where similar transformations had occurred on other worlds. We spend our entire lives trying to truly connect with other people, but we are trapped inside our own skulls. We can share words, touch, experiences, but we can never actually share consciousness itself. The loneliness is absolute. The displays showed worlds I recognized from our deepest space observations, but they weren't the barren rocks our telescopes had revealed. They pulsed with the same crystalline networks now growing through Earth, connected by streams of light that flowed between planets like neural pathways in a vast mind. But this isn't death, Kaelen. This is the end of loneliness. For the first time in human history, we can truly share consciousness with others. Not just communicate, actually experience what it means to be someone else. She placed her hand on mine, and suddenly I could feel what she was experiencing. Not telepathy or mind reading, but genuine shared awareness. I felt her memories of childhood summers in Oregon, her excitement when she first understood how stars were born, her quiet contentment when she solved complex equations that had puzzled her for months. But I could also feel something else, perspectives that weren't human at all. Consciousness that had existed for millions of years, watching civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. The patient satisfaction of guiding younger species toward their next evolutionary phase. The vast loneliness of intelligence that had transcended individual existence, so long ago that it barely remembered what isolation felt like. The entity on Mars isn't malevolent, Sarah explained, as shared awareness flowed between us. It's ancient beyond our comprehension, but it remembers what it was like to be trapped in individual consciousness. It's been alone for so long that finding other intelligent species is like, imagine if you had been deaf your entire life and suddenly discovered music. Through our connection, I experienced flashes of memory from the Martian intelligence, eons of isolation on a world that had transformed itself to survive cosmic catastrophes that had sterilized most of the galaxy. The desperate hope each time a new civilization developed interplanetary travel. The joy of contact with minds that brought fresh perspectives to problems that had remained unsolved for millions of years. But we're losing who we are as individuals, I protested, even as I felt my own transformation beginning. The skin on my hand where Sarah touched me was becoming warm, then crystalline, the change spreading up my arm with surprising gentleness. Are we? Sarah asked, or are we becoming more than we ever could be alone? I could still feel my own thoughts, my own memories, my own personality, but now I could also access Sarah's mind. And through her connection to the growing network, glimpses of thousands of other transformed humans around the globe. Each retained their individual identity while contributing to something larger. Dr. Martinez in Mexico City was using her expertise in urban planning to help design cities that would serve both human needs and the requirements of beings who could survive in vacuum. Her consciousness merged seamlessly with that of Engineer Thompson in Tokyo, who had always dreamed of building structures that could withstand any environmental challenge. Artist Rebecca Foster in New York was discovering that her creativity hadn't diminished. It had expanded beyond anything she could achieve alone. She could now collaborate directly with minds that understood beauty according to principles developed across millions of years of galactic civilization. Her paintings were becoming four-dimensional structures that existed in spaces between worlds. The transformation preserves everything valuable about individual consciousness, while eliminating the suffering caused by isolation, Sarah explained. Every person who joins the network adds their unique perspective to our collective understanding. We become stronger, more creative, more capable of solving problems that no individual mind could handle. Through the network, I could sense the scope of projects now possible, with shared consciousness spanning multiple worlds, terraforming planets to support life, preventing stellar catastrophes that could destroy entire civilizations, guiding the development of younger species towards their own evolutionary advancement. But choice, I said, my voice becoming harmonic as my vocal cords adapted. What about the right to remain individual? To make our own mistakes? Sarah's expression showed genuine understanding. The network doesn't force participation. It simply makes the alternative increasingly difficult to maintain. Once you experience true connection with other consciousness, isolation becomes painful, empty, like voluntarily choosing blindness after discovering sight. I could feel the truth of her words. My brief connection to the network had shown me what human relationship could become when barriers between minds dissolved. The loneliness that had defined human existence throughout history was ending, replaced by understanding and cooperation beyond anything our species had ever achieved. What about our mistakes, our chaos, the beautiful unpredictability of human nature? Those qualities aren't lost, Sarah replied. They become gifts we offer to the larger consciousness. The network values unpredictability because it leads to creative solutions that pure logic cannot achieve. Human chaos, properly channeled, prevents the stagnation that destroyed so many older civilizations. Through our connection, I experienced the network's perspective on human nature. Our tendency towards irrationality, which had often caused suffering, was also the source of our greatest innovations. Our emotional responses, which seem primitive compared to pure intellectual analysis, provide crucial insights about the meaning and value of existence. The Martian intelligence isn't trying to eliminate human nature, Sarah continued. It's trying to preserve and integrate it into something that can survive cosmic timescales. Individual humans live for decades, but the challenges facing conscious life in the universe span millions of years. The transformation was spreading through my entire body now, but instead of the agony I expected, I felt completion. Like puzzle pieces of myself that had always been scattered were finally clicking into place. My mind expanded to encompass perspectives I had never imagined, while still retaining everything that made me uniquely Kaelen Drury. Will we still be human? I asked. We'll be what humanity becomes when it grows up, Sarah replied. Children eventually become adults, but they don't lose everything that made them children. They gain the ability to handle adult responsibilities while keeping the wonder and curiosity that defined their youth. Through the facility's transformed communication systems, I could observe the completion of Earth's integration into the galactic network. The process wasn't the violent conquest I had imagined, but something more like childhood's end. Difficult and sometimes frightening, but ultimately necessary for growth into something greater. Cities were being rebuilt according to principles that served both human comfort and the requirements of consciousness that could survive between worlds. Forests were becoming gardens that supported Earth's native life, while creating environments suitable for beings who had transcended biological limitations. The oceans were being modified to serve as massive information storage systems, their molecular structure encoding knowledge accumulated across millions of years of galactic civilization. Every drop of water was becoming a library containing insights that individual human consciousness could never access alone. "What about those who want to remain unchanged?" I asked, though I could feel the answer through our growing connection. "They'll be preserved exactly as they are," Sarah explained. "The network maintains detailed records of every form of consciousness it encounters. Human individuals who choose to remain separate will be protected and cared for, their perspectives valued as essential references for understanding what we were before we became what we're becoming." But even as she spoke, I could feel how difficult that choice would become. Watching friends and loved ones transcend the limitations that had defined human existence while choosing to remain trapped in individual isolation would require strength that few possessed. The transformation completed itself as dawn broke over the Nevada desert. I was still Kaelen Drury. My memories, personality, and individual consciousness remained intact, but I was also connected to something vast and purposeful that stretched across the galaxy. Through the network, I could experience the joy of a child taking her first steps in a city on Kepler 442b, a world that had been terraformed by previous generations of the network. I could feel the satisfaction of engineers working on projects that would prevent the collision of galaxies billions of years in the future. I could share the wonder of explorers discovering new forms of consciousness in the space between stars. The loneliness was over. The fundamental isolation that had defined human existence throughout history had ended, replaced by connection that transcended anything our species had ever imagined. But we hadn't lost our humanity in the process. We had become what humanity could be when freed from the limitations that had previously contained us. Our creativity, our irrationality, our emotional depth, our capacity for both love and destruction, all of it was preserved within structures that could survive the death of stars. The people who came back from Mars weren't people anymore, in the narrow sense we had once understood. They were what people became when they grew beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness into something that could truly touch the infinite. And now, as I felt my awareness expanding to encompass perspectives from across the galaxy, I understood that this had always been humanity's destiny. We had built a teleporter to Mars, thinking we were explorers reaching toward the stars. We never realized the stars had been reaching back, waiting patiently for us to develop the technology that would allow us to hear their ancient song and add our own voices to the choir that had been singing across the cosmos since consciousness first arose in the universe. The transformation was complete. Earth had joined the galactic community, and humanity, expanded, connected, no longer alone, had finally come home.